The country was doomed as it began to attack and conquer many other countries, and after the announcement of the unification of the Delpes Empire, the last resisting country of Sofin was unable to hold off the invasion. Even the ruling king, the empire's most trusted advisor Delpes, was immediately assassinated by a man whose name was better known as the reincarnation of evil. The ruling nobles who fought in the war were demoted to commoners. The protagonist also came from a noble family, but her fate was different. She was to replace her father's position as head of House Afran. She was the first and only daughter of House Afran, and the girl felt it was her duty to preserve her family's legacy. However, in the Delpes Empire, to be a full heiress, she had to be married to inherit her title. The protagonist realized that she had no other choice, because if she did not inherit the title, her family's fortune and position in society would disappear forever. The girl angrily shouted into the void that such demands were simply outrageous. She didn't understand. Is it really the Delpes Empire's plan to marry off all the girls of the Sofin kingdom? But suddenly an idea popped into her head. She realized she could negotiate a prenup. All she had to do was find a suitable candidate within a year. At about the same time, a man was sitting in a dark room smoking a cigarette. He was informed that a guest wanted to meet him. He was surprised at such a late visit, but still invited her in. The protagonist entered in from the threshold. As soon as she noticed him, she mentally wondered if he was the guild leader of the Nine Knights Guild. Thoth, without stopping smoking, inquired what she needed at such a late hour. The girl was completely enchanted by his beauty, but still confidently said that she wanted him to help her find a spouse. That's how the protagonist ended up in the Guild of Nine Knights to find a perfect candidate for her marriage contract. That night they met for the first time. The protagonist recalled how it happened and how she decided to have them meet. The girl sat and talked to her mother. She only cried bitterly. She said that she should have married the girl off a long time ago. Tay was visibly shocked by such words, remembering how her father had made the announcement unexpectedly at the family banquet at the end of the year when the girl had just turned 15. He said he wished to bind her in the bonds of marriage to another man, Stan, but the girl would not admit it. She ran out of the banquet hall and refused to see her father for 2 months. Since she had left her home, resisting an unwanted marriage, she had heard no more of her fiancé. The heroine was sure that this fellow, among others, felt nothing for her and was in the same position as she was. The girl hardened herself, for it didn't matter to her whether she liked the groom or not, but no sensible lady could marry her cousin. As she remembered the plot of some cheap Korean dorama, she realized that her life was pretty close to hers. Afterwards, the protagonist turned to her mother and said that if she had accepted the marriage proposal then, she would have remained a commoner for the rest of her life. In that case, not only she, but their entire family would have been pushed to the brink of poverty. And afterwards, smiling consolingly, she said that it was really for the best. The protagonist Leyland Efran is 21 years old and was the only daughter of an earl. For some reason unknown to her, she retained memories of her past life where she was an ordinary college student in a country where the main cause of death was a car accident in which she died when she was 21. But she was very lucky because Leyland was reborn in a fairly wealthy family. For this reason, despite all the advantages in the form of wealth, and a lot of difficulties awaited her at a fairly young age. Although the girl had always added up her age in her past life and this one, so she was thinking like a 42-year-old lady. Her country has been taken over by the Delpes Empire and her father has been stripped of his title. At this rate, their family will be forced to lead a miserable existence. There was only one way to protect what she had, and that was marriage. The problem was that she had to find herself the right man as soon as possible. After sending her mom on vacation, the girl assured her that as soon as she finished dealing with her affairs, she would also go on vacation. Her mother was worried about her condition in connection with this news, but the girl told her not to worry. After all, she will definitely find a way out of this situation, and afterwards she will also go on vacation. And yet, even though she said it, she was not succeeding. For some reason, all the men with high titles were old men, and candidates between the ages of 18 and 50 were stripped of their titles. The girl guessed that based on this, the other ladies were in the same position as her. The girl realized that she would have to look for someone outside the captured kingdom and perhaps even in the Delpes Empire itself. She was pulled from her musings by a sudden knock, followed by Sir Gelot Hayden, vice captain of the Knights of the Efren family, entering the room and asking Layla to speak. He's a 23-year-old nobleman who is not only talented and well-mannered, but also devoted to her family. He could be a perfect candidate if it weren't for one but. He's already engaged to her personal maid, Sarah, and they really love each other. The girl knew that if she asked him to marry her, it would be humiliating and wrong enough to her maid. Asked what had brought him out at such a late hour, the boy said he was embarrassed to tell her because he was afraid of offending her. After refusing tea, the boy said that the conversation was serious enough. Watching this grizzled guy, the girl mentally thought that he looked a lot like a little robot, or something like that. Guys like Gelot Hayden weren't exactly the protagonist's type. She was taken out of her thoughts by Gelot, who put the documents on the table and then asked the protagonist to read them carefully because she should hurry up, otherwise she would not be able to do anything about keeping the title. The girl was surprised, noticing that by saying this, he was worried. Leyland was torn with worry and thought that maybe he wanted to propose to her. She realized that it was the easiest option and probably shouldn't be a problem if he proposed to her. But on the other hand, she couldn't do that to her maid Sarah because she was like a sister to the heroine. The guy tried to explain something, but the girl sharply yelled that she couldn't do that. He only remarked sadly that he had expected such a reaction, but the girl already realized that she had rushed because when she interrupted him, he was trying to ask her to consider a nobleman from the Delpes Empire. The guy was very apologetic and was about to leave when the girl clarified which candidates he had found. She explained that she couldn't be sure about them because she didn't have enough information about the nobles of the empire. Then the boy explained that if she wished to get more information, he knew of one place she could go. The girl realized that in any case, whether she wanted it or not, there were no suitable candidates in her kingdom now, and probably the conditions for inheriting the title were such because of the Delpes Empire's plans to marry the lady off to nobles belonging to the Delpes Empire for the purpose of further control. Then finally speaking, Sir Gelot said that she could find information in the Guild of Nine Knights. The girl asked again, very surprised, because although this guild was considered the best information guild on the continent, it was rumored that they sold information for money, and they did it not only within the Delpes Empire itself, but also exported valuable information abroad that could destroy the entire empire. It was rumored that the Nine Knights were selling it to other countries. This business was the impetus for the war. Because of this, all the guild members were killed by order of the emperor. The girl looked questioningly at the boy and informed him that the guild workers were rumored to be enemies of the Delpes Empire and whether such an establishment still existed. But Sir Gelot said that the emperor had recently given the guild permission to rebuild and they had set up headquarters in the capital last month. And afterward, Guy awkwardly said that he had already checked their reliability and asked them to gather information about the main character. Leyland noticed his strangely embarrassed look and so she asked again, what was the reason for such a reaction? Sir said that he had been warned by the guild that they would not sell such information to anyone else, so buying it was a good enough investment. And after excitedly standing up, he said that he had not read the collected data in detail. The girl only asked in surprise if he shouldn't have read it to be sure that it was true, but he hurried to the exit and asked her to see for herself if what was written was true. As she began to read, the girl noticed that the document contained everything: her weight, height, breast size, and even her menstrual cycle. The girl awkwardly admitted that it was quite frightening guild because they knew everything about her that even the protagonist herself couldn't remember. Leyland, after reading the contents, sadly pondered that she didn't like the marriage tradition in the Delpes Empire at all, as the men there would have mistresses even after the wedding, and then bring them into the house to introduce them to their spouses afterwards, as if it was the order of the day. The girl was worried that there was a chance that the groom she found would be just as scum. In addition, she realized that she had no experience in relationships at all, so she was a poor judge of character. But suddenly a thought struck her sharply. She jumped up joyfully, guessing that she could use a sham marriage. So she just had to find someone who could solve this problem within a year, and since the marriage would be fake and not real, then even if her husband spent time with his woman on the side, it wouldn't bother her at all. With that thought, she went to bed, realizing that she definitely needed to meet with the head of the Nine Knights Guild the next day. In the evening, the girl was getting ready to leave, when suddenly she saw a weeping maid who tearfully begged her to take care of her lover Sir Gelot Hayden, that he might live a happy life. Leyland frightenedly asked the girl what she meant, and she cried even louder and said that her fiancé had promised that Siren would remain his favorite even if they couldn't be together. Leyland froze then, either from shock or embarrassment. At this time, the maid continued that if the protagonist did not find a husband, it would be necessary for her to marry Sir Gelot in order to retain power over the county. These words made the girl's insides burn. She vowed that she would kill her foolish fiancé for two reasons. First, because he made her cry, and secondly, because everyone around her, including him, thought that she was incapable of finding a husband. Getting into the carriage, Leyland realized that she only needed 1 year, and in that year she would definitely find a man to help her maintain her family's status. Besides, if she was lucky enough to find a good husband, perhaps a divorce wouldn't be necessary. But now is not the time to think about her murky future, as her main goal is to save her family. They were on their way when the guy turned and asked Leyland if it was safe to go to the guild on his own. After all, she could just ask him to do it instead. The girl reported that she thought it was kind of strange because it was her husband she needed, so it would be better if she asked them for this favor herself. In fact, the reason was that she would never admit to Sir Gelot that she was looking for a husband who would enter into a sham marriage with her, for divorce was still considered almost impossible in this country. When they arrived, a two-story building appeared in front of the girl. This was the abode of the Nine Knights Guild. When she approached the guard, she informed him that she would like to meet the guildmaster. He rang the bell and a cheerful butler appeared behind him and said he would be happy to take them inside. The guildmaster at this time angrily discovered that he was out of cigarettes, giving him a very bad headache. The man's senses were insanely heightened, and he heard everything: human movements, breathing sounds, heartbeats, even blood circulation. Every sound pierced his ears, and it seemed to him that if they all died, he would finally be able to be in silence. The man was angry as the effectiveness of the medicine was getting worse and worse, but suddenly he heard footsteps. He knew for a fact that there was a man walking along with his employee, but he couldn't recognize the main character in any way and assumed it was probably some puppy. Then the butler, turning to the guildmaster, informed him that he had guests and then let them inside without waiting for permission. Sir Gelot was ordered to wait for Leyland outside, as only the customer could enter the room. He was clearly unhappy about this, but Leyland reassured him by saying that everything would be fine and she would be back soon, and afterward entered a dark room, where a noble-looking man, seated in a chair, was watching her, smoking a cigarette. As soon as the girl entered the room, she immediately smelled lavender, but it was obviously with some unknown impurities. The girl could hardly see anything because of the darkness. Then the man lit a small light on the end of his finger and lit a cigarette. Without wasting time on greetings, he went straight to the point and asked what the girl wanted. The heroine looked admiringly at the guildmaster, whose face was faintly illuminated by the moon, and couldn't believe that such a handsome man was in charge of the Nine Knights Guild. She admired his sweet and deep voice, which at the same time sounded insanely masculine and imposing. She realized that she and he were most likely of the same status and maybe even age. Then the girl asked the man to turn on the light and also confidently demanded from him to give her a place where she could sit down, as she had a lot to explain and tell. The one only laughed at this behavior of the girl, and after smiling, said that her request would not be difficult to fulfill. He used magic to light the lamp next to him, and Leyland was glad that he could finally see everything around him. She was surprised that he had been sitting in the dark before, as people usually had to be able to see the other person when they started a conversation. When she looked at the man fully, she recognized that although his hair was disheveled, he was insanely attractive. He had a perfectly defined chin and beautiful eyes. She was sure if he cleaned himself up a bit, he had a lot of admirers. But afterwards, the protagonist realized that her thoughts were insanely stupid, as it is inappropriate to evaluate someone's beauty in such a situation. After all, that's not why she came here. As she sat down in the chair the man provided, Leyland felt discomfort and sincerely didn't understand how a normal person could sit on such a thing, as it was completely hard due to the lack of cushions. So she moved to another place where she felt more comfortable. The man smirked and asked if she hadn't been taught by her parents not to sit on strange men's beds. Examining the seat she was sitting on, Leyland was surprised that he could sleep on such an uncomfortable bed. Looking her over, the man admitted that he had expected to see a boring aristocrat in front of him, but he found the girl quite interesting. Remembering her past fiancé, who he knew of course, the guildmaster wondered, was it because of such a character that Stanifran ran away from her? Not wanting to waste any more of such valuable time, the man inquired, "What is the girl's request?" But she nonchalantly asked him to put out his cigarette before starting a conversation. But when she heard that it was not a cigarette, she thought that what the guildmaster was smoking really didn't look like a cigarette because the smell was unusual. The heroine thought that in her previous life cigarettes looked different, so she assumed that in this world people smoked something similar to cigars. The girl asked in surprise, "Does the man use illegal substances?" But he reassured the girl by saying that he smoked sedatives because he had had a hard day and could not sleep for a long time. Leyland felt awkward and as tense as possible, but deciding to return to her original conversation, she asked what kind of fee the man wanted for his services. Leaning back in his chair and smiling, the guildmaster informed her that since this was the girl's first time here, he would be willing to answer the first 3 questions at a slight discount. The woman wanted to elaborate, but to any further question or indignation, the man answered with only one word: money. Tired of this pointless monologue, she asked how much she should pay. The man showed 3 fingers and said that with the extra payment for the late unannounced visit, she owed him 3 gold coins. The girl was angry as this was not a guild but money extortionists. She threw 3 gold coins towards the man with anger, and the man caught them with ease. The girl, trying to look as proud as possible, asked why the man was acting like this, even though he knew she was an aristocrat. Afterwards, she added that she was aware that in the Delpay's empire, status and title were of great importance. The man was surprised at first and then laughed loudly afterward, saying that he thought Leyland was just a rich fool of an earl family who knew nothing about the outside world, and he admitted that he had repeatedly questioned his men if she was really Leland Ephran. Then the girl rose and said as proudly as possible that she was Countess Ephran and that her interlocutor was just a rude brute. At such a statement from the protagonist, the man laughed loudly despite trying his best to contain his laughter. The girl silently thought that the man sitting across from her was either crazy or obviously smoking illegal substances. And then she continued that since he knew her identity, he must be aware of the reason for her visit. When the man calmed down, he told her that he assumed she had come here to look for a candidate for her marriage would help her maintain her status, and afterward asked her not to be so formal, as it would be much better to talk to him as she had done before, for it was much more interesting to watch, and added that of all the girls he had met, Leyland was the first to remind him of a rough street kid. Hearing this, the protagonist didn't know what to say. She was offended by such a remark from the guildmaster. But the man, without letting her come up with any answer, suggested she move on to discussing details and asked what kind of man she wanted to find and asked her to name specific preferences other than noble blood. The girl said she wanted an aristocrat in his early 20s with the title of baron or below. Men wondered in surprise if that was all her demands. Then Leyland, thinking about it, suggested that the man could give her a list and she would choose someone from it. The man emotionlessly asked if there was enough from a list of 200 people, and then grinned and asked if teenage boys wouldn't be easier to manage than men in their 20s. The girl thought that her interlocutor's tongue had no bones, and probably he thought that she was some kind of child lover who was interested in little boys. But still holding back her anger, she explained that she wasn't particularly interested in guys her age or younger, so such candidates were undesirable. Leyland realized that even though she actually looked like a girl in her 20s, but in reality, this was already her second life. So if you add up her age, she is approximately 42 years old. The man said thoughtfully that she would have a hard time finding someone worthy of 20 years, explaining that he meant whether Leyland would be the guy's first partner. The girl hesitated, not knowing how to answer this question, and said that it was not very important to her. She thought that she didn't really care at all, as she was planning to get married for only a year. The guildmaster only shrugged his shoulders at such an unsure answer, and then he asked why a girl would need a spouse with the title of baron or lower, because usually such people were used by aristocrats with higher status. The girl reported that she didn't have much time to seek the favor of a man with a higher title and try to gain some power in the Delpay's empire. She had heard that all soldiers involved in the war were given a title by the Delpay's empire. The man started to talk about it, but then stopped. He said that if the protagonist wanted the answer to this question, she should pay 3 more gold coins. Seeing his smug face, she refused, thinking that such a small thing was not worth the huge investment. And afterward, she said she wanted a partner who wasn't power-hungry and didn't want kids right away. He sighed, saying that the girl should be married within a month, and warned that it was unlikely to find people not interested in power, besides having a title lower than baron, agree to marry the daughter of a count. Leyland explained that she would be fine if the man was greedy for money. Besides, she wouldn't mind him seeing other women as long as he was her husband. Cheered up, the man agreed. Afterward, he asked, is she willing to trust him to find someone suitable? Without letting her answer, he put his strong hands on her knees and leaned closer, asking, which version of a girl is closer, a man greedy for money in women or a cute boy? Leyland thought about the fact that usually good guys help others. They are like children or little animals, but a good guy wasn't everything. She, looking at the man, speculated whether she could directly say her preference. Looking at the man sitting across from her, she noticed his long and graceful legs as well as his large, muscular arms and broad shoulders. Unable to withstand his charm, unashamedly, dreamily said that she needed some really handsome and hot man. The man met her words with a slight smirk, seeming pleased with Leyland's sincere answer, who at this time was dreaming that it was a truth she was afraid to say because she felt embarrassed, because everyone was already having a hard time finding a suitable candidate. But she was obligated to say it. After all, even when a girl goes on a date, she looks at her partner's appearance. If you look at the statistics, successful people are mostly beautiful. So it won't be a problem after all anyway, as Countess Ephran, she'll still do all the work. As he spoke, the butler stood opposite Sir Gellat, trying to persuade him that he could step quietly away from the door and take his seat in the waiting room. But the lad, flashing his eyes menacingly, informed him that the butler need not worry about him and he wished to remain here, waiting for his mistress. Gellat remained motionless the whole time and worried about whether his mistress could find a suitable candidate for a husband. And he had no idea that on the other side of the heavy door his mistress was thinking only of the beauty of a man's body. To summarize the above, The man asked, did he understand correctly that the ideal candidate for Leyland was a handsome man? And after awkwardly fixing his hair and smiling with his snow-white teeth, he stated that he could consider himself the ideal candidate. The girl was only embarrassed to call him crazy for having such thoughts, though she thought the man was indeed incredibly handsome. The guildmaster then inquired, will she have any other preferences? Leyland informed that she would like a man with black hair, a height of 180 centimeters or more, and a strong build. Also, if possible, he should not smoke, drink, or gamble. He should be gentle enough, but strong. Also must be skillful with a sword. The girl continued to ponder while the guy listened to her with bewilderment. But the girl kept describing her ideal and adding more and more items to the list. The protagonist, bewildered, said that in addition to all of the above, her husband should be able to listen, cook, and treat the servants and his wife well. The man smiled in bewilderment and asked, is Countess Ephraim really saying this in complete seriousness, making such demands? The girl sighed and admitted that she was just daydreaming. And then, having gathered her courage, she said that what she really needed was a man who would take on the role of her husband for just a year. The man smiled with relief, saying that he had been confused by Leyland's words that she didn't care if the man had money or if he had fun with other women. Afterward, he asked if her servants agreed with her husband's choice, but the woman dully reported that she hadn't discussed it with them. A man observing her suggested that perhaps she was in love with a man who had become a commoner, judging by how much she needed a marriage contract. That was likely. Letting out cigarette smoke, he asked if Leyland planned to build a relationship with her husband after they signed the contract. With a shake of her head, the heroine reported that she did not. And then she thought about the fact that people in the Delpes Empire would rather spend their time with their lovers than spend it on rebuilding the country. So she couldn't trust men like that. Hearing her answer, the man asked, what will be the terms of the contract? The girl revealed that she will pay according to his needs. First, she will pay so much so that he can live in comfort for the entire time they are married. And secondly, when their contract ends, she will pay such compensation so that the man can live a life of comfort. And then she said that she wanted her people to live peacefully and happily, so even if her husband dated other women, she would be satisfied as long as he behaved appropriately in public. After all, she's all about keeping power over the territory. Then the man asked what the girl could offer in return in addition to payment. The latter replied that she would fulfill her duties as a wife. The interlocutor asked if the length of the contract was related to the fact that she wanted to have an heir. She immediately realized that the man was being suspicious when he asked her about such things. But actually, for the man himself, the question was quite obvious. After all, according to the law, a woman could receive the title of head of the family only if she was successfully married. Looking at his interlocutor, he realized that the girl was quite clever, since she had thought things through far enough. But he knew that in order to receive and recognize his title, he had to attend the royal banquet, which was held every spring to introduce all the new heads of families. This year's banquet was scheduled for next month, and during Leyland's marriage, she would have time to have an heir. After thinking it over, the man said that he could assure Leyland that her contract would end after her heir was presented at the royal banquet next year. He then asked if she wished to have a child of her own or if she planned to adopt. After receiving a reply from the girl that she did not want to have children, the man asked her what she meant when she talked about the duties of a wife. The girl then calmly explained that in public they would have to act like a married couple, but in reality it was not a necessity. Staring at her, the man wondered, doesn't the girl realize how charming she looks at this moment? The man said that he wanted the girl to pack her things and go to the capital this morning, where he would meet her. Leyland agreed without arguing, though she was surprised by this decision from the guildmaster. After all, she had thought that they would choose someone together now, and then go to the capital together. After all, this would be ideal, since the necessary candidates would be gathered at the ball, and she could personally discuss everything with them. After saying goodbye to the girl, the guildmaster informed her that he had some business to take care of, so it was time for her to go back. As she walked out the door, she found that her guard had been standing behind her the whole time, who immediately inquired if the girl had been able to work things out. She assured him that everything was fine, awkwardly hoping he hadn't heard anything. She was especially embarrassed that she had told the guildmaster that the perfect candidate for her would be a hot guy. When the girl left, the man called all the workers to him. 3 men stood next to him, standing nervously in a line. Then smoking, the guild leader asked if any of them wanted to enter into a marriage contract for a year with Leyland. They began to whisper, as they did not understand such behavior on the part of the guildmaster. After all, he had never asked about something like this before. One of the men reported that he did not know how much money Countess Ephraim had offered, but a man of lower status than hers was unlikely to want to divorce her after the contract was over. Moreover, the Countess was still one of the few beauties of her country, and she was one who never dared to go outside her territory. She was also a lady of the duchy who had been attending social gatherings since she was 12 years old, as successors were usually introduced into society as early as possible. The man thought about the words of the speaker and afterward listened attentively to the discussion of those gathered. They reflected on the fact that they had information about all low-status aristocrats anyway. Another worker said that this was why it would be quite easy to weed out unwanted candidates, especially since people with black hair are quite rare. But then the guildmaster threw his wig to the floor and rose from his seat. The men standing there immediately realized that this was not a good thing and were also madly surprised to find that the man in front of them had been hiding his true identity all this time. The next morning she said goodbye to her mother, explaining that she had to leave. Her mother, worriedly, asked if she really had to leave so soon. Her father would be back soon, and he was sure to have some good candidates. But after reassuring her mother, Leyland told her that if her father thought of something, they should send a letter and inform her about it. Afterwards, she said that she would go to the capital to get some information, and while she was there, she would go sightseeing so that she could report back afterwards. But at the end, I sadly noticed that even if now she is traveling on business, it doesn't change the fact that she had to be in the Empire sooner or later, so the protagonist can't change the necessity of the trip. Soon the carriage drove off, taking the girl away from the house she had lived in for 20 years. After the king's death, she and her passed a 21st century girl and become mistress of the land. But she was still completely unaware of the influence she had in the domain. She had been diligently fulfilling her duties all this time, as well as compensating soldiers who were captured in the war, regardless of their title. So at least she was confident that those would be able to return to their homes and live a decent life. Layla and Ephraim hoped that the people affected by the war would begin to believe that their new lord was worth trusting, and that she would be able to protect them. The girl still didn't understand how an ordinary person like her could become like this, because in her past life she had naively assumed that she would be able to count on her parents for a long time to come. She was brought out of her thoughts by the voice of Sir Gelot, who promised to protect her mistress to the very end, and she smiled and thanked him for his loyalty. And then she realized that from now on she should become more independent. After all, there are people in this world who depend on and believe in her. The carriage driving away along the city was watched by a black-haired man whose head was covered by a hood from which only bright scarlet eyes could be seen. Leyland, as well as many others who intended to enter the Delpes Empire, were stuck waiting on the bridge. When she looked out the window, she saw two men talking. One of them worriedly inquired, "Why are the Empire soldiers inspecting the carriages?" At that moment, her guard entered the carriage and warned that the lord of these parts had rebelled, but it had been suppressed in time. So the soldiers are checking to see if people are bringing anything dangerous into the Empire. After looking over the nobles who were heading to the Empire, she realized how foolish and rash a decision it was to take only 3 people with her. After all, the others were accompanied by at least 10 guards. Turning to her knight, she informed him that she had a bad feeling about this, so she asked him to move with the others to avoid getting into trouble. The knight agreed with her thought. As she looked out the window at the rushing carriages, she was surprised. Then the knight said that although he did not know the reason for such a hurry, it would be better if they did not fall behind, and asked the coachman to increase the speed. Everything seemed to be fine, and Leyland was safe, but some sense of persecution kept her in suspense. Then the carriage shook violently, and she noticed with horror that a wheel had fallen off from the carriage of those aristocrats who rode in front. Her knight drew the curtains sharply shut and asked her to be as quiet as possible and try not to breathe loudly if possible. She realized at once that the boy who was driving the carriage was still outside, so she jumped out. Sir Gelot tried to stop her, but he could not. The girl saw a picture of a black-haired man drawing a bloody sword over her subordinate's head. The black-haired man was shaking in terror, unable to resist. The girl watched shocked and couldn't say anything. As the man stuck his sword into something solid, as it turned out, the cold steel stuck into the wooden carriage just a few centimeters from the coachman's face. As she watched the man whose sword was stained with blood, and whose clothes were black as night and his hair the color of tar, she noticed that amidst it all, his blood-red eyes and endless bloodlust stood out vividly. She smiled nervously, thinking that this was how her second life would end. Then she smelled the familiar odor of sedatives. The man pulled his sword from the carriage, jumped off it, and then casually watching the girl smoke and began to walk away, but she did not care. She knew that if they wanted to escape, now was their chance. Turning to the couch boy, she found that he was in shock and unable to react in any way, nor was he able to continue driving the carriage. Sir Gelot turned to her and informed her that all was well, and he would be able to lead them to the Delpes Empire. But she took the reins in her own hands, informing him that all was well. She then asked the knight to get into her maid's carriage as soon as possible, whereupon she set the horses galloping. The carriage driving away, watched the man standing motionless, who did not even make a single attempt to stop them. He looked with a smile at the noble lady, who, saving her subordinates, was driving the carriage herself. As she relaxed and saw that she wasn't being chased, she realized that she had met the man who had created all of this. His name was Khalid, and the man was definitely known as the craziest assassin in the Delpes Empire. At this time, somewhere in the empire, a man filling out some important reports wondered why Khalid had suddenly returned to the capital. After all, His Imperial Highness had ordered to conquer all the kingdoms on the continent in order to find out about the star fragment. It was an old tale that had been passed down from generation to generation. The fragment of the star was a stone, and if what was known about it was true, then the shards of the star had to be somewhere near the hills of the seashore in Ephraim territory, though it was not known for certain. After the blonde-haired gentleman thought about the fact that Khalid might have been there already, he worriedly realized that the day would surely come when the warrior would learn that the star shard had never really existed. At this moment, the Ephraim family was in a state of chaos as the kingdom fell at the feet of the Delpes Empire. At this time he was brought out of his musings by the arrival of a servant, who informed the Duke that his Imperial Majesty was expecting him. Thoth rose and went straight to his audience. It had already been a week since Leyland had arrived in the capital. Before she could recover from the shock, she and her maid immediately started preparing for the ball. The girl also took lessons in imperial etiquette. Leyland was even happy about it, as she gradually began to forget about her encounter with that terrifying assassin. In class, she discovered that the Delpes Empire and the Sophin Kingdom had very similar dances and etiquette, so the preparations for the ball were going quite smoothly. However, there remained one difficulty that kept her mind off of the matter. The girl sat and discussed with her knight that the guild had not made any attempt to contact them since then. And after all, it had already been 11 days since their arrival in the Empire. The distressed knight said that the candidates were already on their way to the capital, so there was nothing left for them to do but wait. And afterward, he sadly reported that he had sent Coachman Chen away twice a day with errands to the guild, but to no avail. Then the girl said worriedly that the ball had already started, so in all likelihood they would not be able to get an audience with the emperor, which was to take place in 3 days. And then she said that apparently they had only one option left, and that was to register the marriage contract. The girl hoped that they still had some time. Then the knight, calling for an adequate assessment of the situation, said that because the Delpes Empire was in a rather precarious position right now, large and small incidents were breaking out here and there. For this reason, the empire had to deal with a huge number of complaints. It was because of this that even if she could fill out the marriage contract now, it would not be reviewed for a while yet. Remembering the face of her maid Sidera, who tearfully begged to let her lover live a happy life, she realized that she could not marry a knight, but perhaps there was no other choice left to her. The girl didn't know why she wasn't ready for this, perhaps because even as a child her mental age was still in her early 20s, as she still had all the memories from her past life. But watching the growth and development of Sir Geleth Hayden and their relationship with Sarah, she never imagined that she would become his wife. Even though he had reached maturity and grown into a serious man, disappointed that in all likelihood there was nothing more they could do, she offered him her sincere regret, and after glancing at the marriage contract again, she held out her seal to certify the document. For Leyland, marrying her knight was one of the worst-case scenarios. She was very sorry because she was putting the lives of the people close to her in misfortune. But she was interrupted by the coachman, who informed her that one of the 9 knights had come for the sake of meeting her. Then she smelled a sedative, and afterward she felt the touch of the man's body, who bent over her, covering with his hand the place where she had just been about to place her seal, thus ruining the lives of her maid and knight. The one smoking reported that the Duchess was rather impatient. Sir Gelot reacted to the stranger's behavior and jumped up from his seat to secure his mistress. But she gestured to him that everything was fine and she didn't need his protection. Afterward, she explained that he was one of the 9 Knights Guild. After clearly displeased with the man who had come, the protagonist asked what he meant by calling her impatient. After all, she had already waited long enough. The one only smiled, then tossed the questionnaire with number 1 on it and said that they had scrutinized the list carefully to ensure that Countess Ephraim was satisfied with the candidates. The woman, still very unhappy, looking at the man who had come, asked how much extensive information did they have to check that it took a whole month and a half. She turned to her knight and asked him to leave them alone, as this was a private conversation. She assured him that she would be all right, and that Gelot need not worry. When he left, the protagonist opened the candidate's profile. It was a baron in his early 20s. He was a knight of the Delpes Empire. His height was 178 centimeters, and he had no family. After looking through his profile, she was convinced that there was nothing special about this person. And afterward, she was surprised at such detail in what was described, comparing it to a criminal record. After reaching the page with the candidates' portraits, Leyland sarcastically wondered if the portraits were the reason for such a long delay. The one only informed with a smile that the protagonist was very clueful. But the girl didn't care much about the delay anymore, as at least she would be able to get a favorable viewing experience. After looking at the photo of the first man, she was convinced that she wouldn't mind meeting him, and she was surprised that he looked like a fairly normal person. Then the man asked if she wanted to stop this choice, but she said she wanted to see all the candidates, since in this guy she was confused only by his age because he was only 20 years old, and considering her past life, the girl was over 40. Showing 3 more numbered questionnaires, he informed me that it would cost 10 gold coins to view each of them. The girl agreed, and afterwards she thought that buying these questionnaires would not make sense if the proposed men rejected her. But the interlocutor informed her that this was out of the question. She asked with the sweetest face, "What made the man think so?" But the man did not answer, only wondered, not understanding whether the girl did not realize the magnitude of her attractiveness. She proceeded to look at questionnaire number 2. The man was 29 years old, 176 centimeters tall, a knight with no connections and no particular accomplishments. He cared for children and also made donations. She was angry, thinking that perhaps he had some obscene intentions for the children. Throwing the form on the table, she called him names, and then looking at his face, she mentally threatened that she loved to cut something off. Although afterwards she sensibly noticed that the man was quite handsome and yet did not look his age at all. So she asked her interlocutor if the images of people were realistic. Leyland suspected that they might be idealized like the king's portraits. But after she calmed down and picked up the 3rd questionnaire, she thought that you can't judge a person just because of their looks. Even though their marriage would be a sham, she couldn't be around the man she accused of having a strange love for children. When she opened the 3rd questionnaire and looked at the 28-year-old man, she recognized that he had an ordinary face, although he made a good impression. But then she read that he was supporting 3 families and needed money to support them. The girl was shocked to think that it was about 3 wives, and she mentally noted that the man was responsible enough. But while she didn't mind that her husband would love other women, lying to each of the 3 wives about the existence of others seemed like cheating to her. She wondered if, given everything she had read, number 1 was the best choice. She realized that perhaps the 4th questionnaire would be similar to those of the 2nd and 3rd, but she decided to take a look nonetheless. Her hand, which was reaching for the questionnaire, was followed closely by a man. She read that he was a baron who was 26 years old and worked as a civil servant and had his own business. His height was 192 centimeters. He also knew how to cook. The girl noticed with delight that this description reminded her of a popular chef from her past life, and his description sounded like he owned a restaurant business. Looking carefully at his profile, she was pleased to note that even though he liked money, he was not involved in any scandals or affairs with women. And also working as a civil servant and running his own business shows that he knows how to make money. She was afraid to turn the page and see what he looked like, because maybe he wouldn't be as good as the others. She was afraid to turn the page and see what he looked like, because maybe he wouldn't be so good compared to the others. Then the interlocutor asked, "Didn't the candidate Baron Surrey turn out to be the best favorite for her?" The girl didn't understand who he was talking about, but afterward he said he was talking about the first number. The girl admitted that she still couldn't read the official language of the Delpes Empire very well, so she read his last name as Soros. The man explained that the Baron is quite deferential to his elders, so surely he would be respectful to his wife. And number 2, Viscount Philot, may be fond of children, but at least he doesn't bully them. The girl angrily tapped her hands on the table, informing him that luring innocent children with candy to do things to them was what bullying was all about. Afterwards, she asked him what his reason for the prenup was. The man replied that Viscount Philot wished to establish a large orphanage with the money he received. The girl was angry at the mere thought of it, for giving money to such a man was too suspicious, and after asking for number 4, she opened his form to say his name, but again she misread it, so she sat there trying to make out the words while she stared, trying to read it correctly. I accidentally dropped the questionnaire from my hands, and it fell out and opened right on the page with his photos. Seeing his portrait, the girl was convinced that the man depicted on it was, to put it mildly, very attractive. The girl put the questionnaire on the table and ordered her heart to calm down. But after thinking that it was undoubtedly a Photoshop, she got upset. She opened the profile again, ready to ignore the effects of the filters, and looked at his face. She blushed with embarrassment. The man was insanely handsome and like a resting deity with an insanely calm energy and deep gaze. The girl rose enthusiastically and inquired when she could meet the man. The interlocutor asked in amazement, "Has she made up her mind so quickly?" and warned that he could arrange a date within an hour with any of the selected candidates. Leyland said that she wanted to meet Baron Khalid, but the man shockingly interjected. Then she showed his profile with bright shining eyes and informed him that she wanted to meet this guy and was surprised that the man corrected her pronunciation of her last name. But she remembered it so that it wouldn't be awkward next time. Afterward, the man asked, did she really like this guy so much that she made up her mind so quickly? The man reported that he added him at random. Without much thought, then the girl wondered worriedly, can't she choose him? And mentally she was upset, thinking that someone so perfect had no need to enter into such a contract. But the man said that he just wanted to ask her why she had chosen him. Then the girl tried to hold back all her influx of emotions and said that this man looked like a nice guy and also left a pleasant impression. Then the man laughed and reminded her of her words that a good guy is a good-looking guy. The girl burned with shame, cursing herself for telling him too much, and after directly deciding to confess that she thought this young man was handsome. The interlocutor only wondered with surprise how handsome that man was to her. Then the girl enthusiastically said that he was completely and utterly excellent. Her interlocutor only smiled, thanking the girl for such words. The girl looked at him bewildered, not understanding why he thought she was going to compliment him. And after reaching out with his hand to pick up the fourth questionnaire, saying that he needed to clarify some information, if Leyland had already decided on a candidate, she asked very strongly to give up the questionnaire and was even willing to buy it. But he took it and said he didn't want to give it to her, and then he used his magic to burn it. The girl watched with tears in her eyes as the questionnaire with the image of the man she thought was a work of art was burned. Then the interlocutor said that she should pay him 40 gold coins since she had looked at all the profiles. The girl grudgingly thought it was probably a ceremonial portrait, and she doubted that the real person would match her image. And then she gave him coins, but only 18, explaining that she would pay the rest after the contract was signed. And afterwards, looking at the man with a threatening look, she told him that she wanted to see her candidate immediately. The man only asked if she had read the details concerning his work, and the girl did not even secretly admit that she thought he was the chef of a famous restaurant. Then the man said, 9 nights. The girl didn't understand at first and thought it was the name of some bar or place and excitedly hoped that his restaurant wasn't in the red light district. But after she pictured the man in a fancy dress, she shuddered at the thought that he might not be interested in women. Jumping up, she asked if the man was gay. It made sense that a man might want to enter into a prenup to hide his orientation. And then that pretty much explained the reason why a handsome 26-year-old man working for the Imperial Civil Service was still single and unmarried. She pondered the name 9 Nights and told the man that the name of the store seemed familiar enough. Afterward, she stood up and shouted, "Does he really mean the 9 Nights Guild?" The realization belatedly came to her that it comes out if he is the head of the guild of the 9 Nights comes out it's about the guildmaster, and means that the Baron is the superior of the person standing in front of her. But he only coldly looked at the girl and said that he was Baron Khalid. The girl was surprised to hear that the man had black hair color. The other one had light-colored hair. She sat down, thinking that it was strange that Baron Khalid and the guildmaster of the guild were both in the same person. And after presenting the painting of the artist who was his subordinate, I realized that he had probably already died of fright while working alongside him, as his boss was definitely quite picky regarding his portrait. Then the protagonist became sad, thinking she should give up waiting and prepare to see an ordinary face under the hood. But at least the man had eyes and a mouth. Taking off his hood, the man looked at her confidently. The girl was shocked by his charming appearance and beauty. He was firstly a real person, and secondly, 1,000 times better than in the portrait. So the artist obviously failed to convey all his beauty. She asked him why he was working as a guildmaster with such a beautiful face. The girl suggested that with such looks he could take over the world, but the man only coldly replied that he had already done so. Then she assumed the man meant that he had taken over the world by selling the Delpay's Empire information from all over the world through his guild. The girl almost fainted as his maddening face threatened to give her a heart attack. The main character excitedly asked if the cigarettes he smokes have any illegal substances in them that make other people look much prettier. The man smiled and asked again if he understood her question correctly, that she wanted to know if he thought she was beautiful. The girl realized with embarrassment that this was not what she wanted to ask. The sight of the man confused her thoughts. Sneaking a glance at Khalid standing in front of her, she asked, "Will they really be able to make a prenup?" The man asked if she had changed her mind and was going to pay him before the contract was signed. The girl didn't listen to him at all. Mesmerized by his face, she couldn't believe that she had made a deal with the god of beauty. The man indicated that he wished to discuss the details of the contract with Countess de Fran. The man handed the contract to the girl with a request that she review it. Afterwards, he asked that they talk informally from now on. The girl asked why he wanted them to continue the conversation informally. She suggested that maybe he liked it when she talked to him in a simple way, but the man smiled radiantly and replied that it enlivened the conversation. That smile made the girl's heart seize, and she mentally wondered, can it hold up tonight? The man was looking at the contract. Afterwards, he asked if they would have to share a room. The girl informed him that in her kingdom all married couples usually share a bedroom. At least they have to act like a real couple. Then the man asked if he had understood correctly that they would have to sleep together, but without body contact. The girl confirmed, but then asked if it would be okay since they would not be married for real. And after looking at her interlocutor excitedly, she asked if he would be able to fulfill this condition. The protagonist was worried that the man might not be comfortable sharing a bed with her, but he did not answer and continued to read out the terms of the contract and reached the point where every time one of the rules of the contract is violated, 10% of the payment is deducted. And then he asked if this rule applied to the Duchess. She just awkwardly agreed because it seemed so obvious to her. Although Leyland realized that she had added this rule herself, but for some reason, right now she felt like she was the only one who would regret it very much. The man then asked to be paid 4 times his allowance and then he would sign the contract. The girl was shocked at such a request and asked, does he really want to be compensated right now, as she was going to give him everything after the end of the contract. So asking for such an amount is a bit too much. The man then explained that as compensation he only wanted the limestone hills on the seashore. He was talking about the coastal escarpment located in the northern part of their property. This location was ideal for an apartment development, but there really wasn't anything special about these hills. This earth is under her family's complete control, so no one else has access to it anyway. The girl admitted to herself that she had planned to give him a lot more as compensation, and it was clearly too good to be true. Since she really liked the guy, she asked him if he was sure of his choice, since she would not be able to give him any other allowance after the divorce. But the latter confirmed his words, saying that would be enough for him, and asked if they had finished discussing the details of the contract. The girl reflected that the length of the contract was 1 year, during which they would appear before the public and also introduce her hair. To finalize the contract, they put their names on the marriage license and on the adoption and divorce papers. It seemed rather strange for the protagonist to be married and divorced at the same time. But even if they still needed to find an heir, the main part of the plan had already been accomplished, and that made Leyland relieved. Looking at the man who was checking the contract, she wondered, is he really satisfied with something like this? He seemed to be very fond of money, but he asked for a useless piece of earth as compensation, and that didn't fit his image at all. Then she thought that maybe he was looking for a private place because he was homosexual, or maybe he needed a place to rest. Just by this time, the man had finished his work on the contract, pulled himself up and said that since that was the end of their business, he would be the first to leave. The girl was about to thank him, but he interrupted her and reminded her that she had to pay him for the forms. Reaching for the money purse, she suggested that these were the situations in which his disproportionate love of money manifested itself. Afterward, she asked, can't his business wait a few minutes to talk to her? But the man, smiling, flipped a coin and said that this was a case that required the application of his skills. After saying goodbye, he left. The girl, who still thought he was some kind of chef, assumed that by skills he meant cooking. She wondered how expensive the ingredients he used for cooking must be if he needed so much money. Leyland thought that maybe he was like a character from an anime she knew who cooked some legendary dishes. She was distracted from her reverie about Delisa Kalida by a voice asking her to enter the room. It was Sir Gelot. He said that there was a carriage waiting for her outside, and he had been warned that Sir Delisa Fran had prepared the carriage. And then he asked, is there anyone else in the capital with the same surname as the protagonist? She was surprised at first, but then realized it was her husband's name, but pronounced completely differently. Because of the difficulty in reading it, she got it wrong again. She had originally thought his name sounded like Delay, after which she pondered over the last name. Leyland couldn't figure out how to pronounce it. She had a few options, Khaled, Khalid, or Khaled. But then she remembered his words and that he pronounced his last name as Khaled, so it was the only correct option. And afterwards, the heroine thought that it would not hurt her to start a thorough study of the imperial language so that she would not make such ridiculous mistakes again. At this time, the knight was still standing anxiously, asking if the girl knew the man who had sent the carriage. The heroine then announced that from now on she was a married woman and Delis was her husband. The knight shockingly asked how she could have made this decision without consulting him. After all, the man could be a suspicious person. But the girl explained that Delis was a member of the Nine Knights Guild, but didn't dare to tell that he was a guildmaster. The knight asked again, and the woman patiently repeated that her husband worked for the guild and he came from the lower class of the aristocracy, so there would be no problem on that side. The man hesitated. At this time, the girl was looking at the documents, and afterwards she said that they could be destroyed because the Guild of 9 Knights would take care of obtaining the marriage license, so she didn't need to rush to the office by a certain time. The knight, analyzing the situation, realized that no matter how small her husband's family was, the connection with the guild that was under His Majesty's control was undoubtedly an advantage, especially since he was sure that his mistress had taken all the small details into consideration. But somehow, still he had his doubts. Then finally speaking, he asked if they could go to the mansion right now. The girl agreed, not wanting to stay in this place any longer. Upon arrival, a mansion of enormous size spread out in front of her. It seemed to be at least 3 times the size of the mansion in her county. As they stepped out of the carriage, a butler greeted her and introduced himself. Her subordinates looked at everything around them with rapt attention. Then the butler opened the door and told them that this residence had been granted by His Majesty and was currently served by 10 people. The knight immediately thought that it was somehow strange that His Majesty had presented a house to a petty aristocrat. But he was brought out of his thoughts by the voice of the butler, who, addressing the arrivals, said he would order the men's servants to carry their luggage into the mansion and asked them to follow him. The butler said he would send another servant to escort the knight to his room, but he would escort Countess Ephraim himself. Sir Gelot immediately realized that the situation was as strange as possible, and he was interested in the real identity of his mistress's consort. As Leyland walked to her room, she was surprised to see that the mansion was even more posh than she had expected. It wasn't surprising, after all. He was a guildmaster, not for pretty eyes, and had worked hard to reach such a position. She sadly realized that they would have to leave for her kingdom right after the banquet was over, so they wouldn't be here long at all. She wondered if Delis was planning to go with her. She hoped he wouldn't make an excuse like he was very busy and therefore couldn't visit her for a whole year. Though at least the protagonist had all the official paperwork at least, so his presence didn't matter, but she, imagining a gorgeous man in a snow-white suit, admitted to herself that not seeing him every day would be a great loss, as he was insanely handsome. Then the butler turned to the Countess and asked her to come indoors. She immediately smelled the scent of lavender, so intrinsic to its sedative. The butler informed her that this was the bedroom she would share with my lord. The girl was very embarrassed by Atomu, even though she was only observing in front of her the bed of the man she had signed a contract with, but her heart was just jumping out of her chest. Then the butler informed her that my lord had gone to work and would not be returning tonight, so she could sleep well. The girl immediately picked up on this strange comment from the butler, as it was surprising that he was so calmly telling his wife to sleep because her husband wasn't coming. But the butler paid no attention to her look. He said that although for a short time, but for him to serve the Duchess, it is the same as serving his master, so she has every right to use the mansion as she sees fit. Watching the butler, the girl thought that perhaps he was also a member of the 9 Knights Guild, and he might also know about the contract. Without hiding her suspicion, the girl turned to him and stated that he appeared to be well aware of the situation. But the butler reassured her, telling her that he had only received orders to make sure that the Countess's stay in the mansion was comfortable. The girl noticed at once that the butler knew exactly about everything because he addressed them differently. He called him my lord and the girl Countess Ephraim. But pretending not to understand, the girl asked with a smile on her face to look after her welfare and thanked. Then bowing, the butler informed her that dinner would soon be served, so he would come to escort her to the first floor behind the dining hall. The girl realized that she was a mere guest who would be leaving soon, but even so, she would be treated very respectfully. She was glad of that. Looking around her room and the luxurious bed on which her now husband used to rest, she wondered if she could really sleep soundly with Delis in the same room. At this time there was some ball going on in the county. The people were terrified, watching the picture of Khalid not hesitating to take a man's life. There was blood all over his face, but despite that, he was smiling wickedly. The guards then ran up to the people and asked them to leave the premises as soon as possible and go outside. The man was about to smoke when he was approached by a blonde-haired man, the Prime Minister. Khalid noticed with annoyance that the Prime Minister was insanely annoying and wanted to kill him, but somehow remembering Leyland's face changed his mind. The Prime Minister took a quick look at the dead man and asked, couldn't Khalid do the sweep a little more quietly next time? Originally, the name 9 Knights belonged to the intelligence department under the direct authority of the Emperor, but Khalid suggested turning the 9 Knights into a guild as a diversion. Thus, the 9 Knights began working independently and pretended to reveal information about the weaknesses of the Delpes Empire, but in the end, everything they did turned out to be to its benefit. They helped the Empire unite the entire continent. One day a knave prince of one of the invaded countries came to the guild and requested information in order to kill the emperor, not realizing that it was the last day of his life. The prime minister turned to the soldiers and asked them to clean up the mess. They immediately started to carry out the order. Then the blonde-haired man wondered, why did Khalid kill the prince right here? After all, he had been ordered to deal with him secretly. He knew that this crazed killer Khalid was not at all concerned about his reputation, and apparently the title of Bloody Butcher wasn't enough for him. At that time, there was a girl sleeping peacefully in his mansion. She was like a defenseless child. The man climbed into the room through the window and watched her, afraid to disturb her sleep. He was surprised that he felt nothing around her. He didn't feel irritation, as with other human beings. As he sat down on the bed and continued to stare at her, he noticed that the girl trembled, though he didn't even have time to touch her. He was amused by her cute defensive reaction. Deliz was genuinely curious. Who was this girl and why was she so different from the others? He touched her hair, but she only reacted strangely, as if she was displeased. The man was a little angry, not understanding why even in her dreams she didn't want him to touch her. But suddenly, unexpectedly to him, she began to cry. Then the man's face was distorted with shock. He did not understand how he should behave and what he could do to make the girl feel better. At the same time, the girl had a rather strange dream. She was in some dark room and couldn't find her way out of it at all. Suddenly, a man appeared in front of her who was armed and reeked of some kind of danger. She couldn't see his face, but she could smell the strong odor of blood everywhere. She didn't understand who was responsible for all this. Searching for answers, Layla noticed the man in front of him with some strange aura gathering around him. His hand and sword were completely covered in blood. She didn't have time to make out or understand anything, but suddenly the man dropped his sword and started hiding somewhere underground. Then a quiet plea for help reached her ears. She immediately started looking for the one who had called her, and it was the same man who had been standing all bloody before. Now only his hand was visible from the ground. The girl followed the sound, trying to determine who it was. She suspected it might be her knight. She herself did not understand why, but she really wanted to save this man. So the protagonist grabbed his hand and tried to pull him out of this abyss. She knew she was the only one who could save him now. When she finally pulled the man out, he stood up and looked at her. The girl, seeing his face, stared excitedly, not knowing how to act. She was lying on the bed crying, tears rolling down her cheeks. The man touched her, but the girl grabbed his hand through her sleep and pulled him closer to her. He didn't understand what she was doing, but he didn't resist it at all. Then the girl started calling Deliz by name. The man didn't understand why she was calling him, even more surprised by the fact that she wasn't calling him Khalid but Deliz. She continued to cry, clutching his arm. Then, with his other hand stroking her hair, he informed her that he was near. Immediately after his words, she calmed down and stopped crying. Deliz, agitated, crouched down below watching her and continued to stroke her soft skin. He didn't understand what she might have dreamed, nor did he realize the reason she was calling for him. But he knew for certain that the girl sleeping so peacefully in his touch was not at all unusual. Leyland woke up, and when she came to, she didn't realize when she had managed to fall asleep, as the night seemed rather restless. All night she tried to be careful, but at some point, apparently tired of waiting for some trick, and fell asleep due to the fatigue caused by the circumstances that had befallen her. She didn't understand what she was dreaming, or if it was really a dream. She didn't quite remember what she had dreamt, but she knew for sure that she had seen Deliz. She was very happy that she could see his beautiful face, even in her dreams. But she was brought out of her reverie by a girl, her maid, who had come with her. The latter, excited, entered the room and told the mistress that they should hurry and explained that her husband had sent her many gorgeous dresses that she would have to wear to the ball tomorrow. Moreover, these dresses were from Delius Atelier. The girl interrogated, not understanding what was special about this establishment. Then the maid, shocked that the protagonist does not realize the value of these outfits, said that this is one of the greatest fashion houses in the royal capital. And even if she is from a rich aristocratic family, she will have to wait for her turn for at least 2 to 3 months. Moreover, Madame Heron herself came to adjust this dress to her size. The girl thought that since the atelier was so popular and her consort was able to get those dresses so easily, perhaps the power of the Nine Knights Guild was much greater than she had realized. Finally dressed, she would go downstairs with the excited maid. Then the doors opened and she saw a gorgeous girl dressed in furs. She introduced herself and then said that she was the owner of Delius Atelier. Looking closely at the woman, Leyland admitted that she really did look like the owner of a famous atelier, as she looked insanely stylish and was dressed with the latest fashion. After saying hello, the girl said it was a pleasure to finally meet her in person. Then bowing, the proprietress announced that she wanted to present some of the outfits she had brought with her. She reported that she had chosen the best dresses she had. While Eri Heron was pulling out outfits from her traveling bag, the maid approached the girl and informed her that she had been worried about what Countess Ephraim would be wearing to the banquet, but now she was completely calm. The girl asked in bewilderment what was wrong with her outfit, for she sincerely believed that a dress remained a dress even if they put gold embroidery on it. But in vain, when she saw the outfit that Madame Heron had prepared for her, she was at a loss for words, for they had used not only gold but jewels to decorate it. Watching all this, the protagonist and her assistant were shocked. The latter even cried with happiness, admiring such a beautiful outfit and rejoicing that her mistress would wear it at the banquet. Leyland watched mesmerized as the maid continued to praise the atelier owner's outfit. She was insanely pleased to hear such compliments. Afterwards, she offered to try it on. When Leyland put it on, she found that it was a bit loose. But that wasn't a problem, as Eri Heron had already set about taking her measurements and fixing the dress to her figure. Then she informed her that the royal banquet would open in a few days and asked if this would be her first visit to the capital. The girl confirmed the speculation and embarrassedly said that it was a bit tiring trying to do so much in a short period of time. While Madame Heron was fitting her dress, she told her about the capital's trends and also told her the necessary rumors to make her feel comfortable. One of them was that a certain earl's family had interbred with the family of a sworn enemy. The girl admitted that everything Madame Heron had told her would be very useful, as she had little knowledge of the affairs of the Delpes Empire. Still, she remarked that it was rather strange that she was reporting it so readily, and perhaps she was telling her on purpose. Then she decided to inquire, apologizing in advance, for perhaps her words would sound rude. The girl asked if the woman had any joint affairs with her husband. Taff rose, thinking over her answer and not knowing how she could answer that question. At this time, the protagonist assumed that she was either familiar with or a member of the Nine Knights Guild. The woman was still silent, marveling at the Duchess's insight and good intuition. Then she laughed nervously and said that she had just received payment from her husband and had brought her a dress to prepare her for the banquet. But Leyland continued to scrutinize her and saw that judging from her reaction and the fact that she didn't deny being involved in her consort's affairs, it was entirely possible that she was related to him. After all, it was impossible that someone like her would take time out of her schedule to help a backwater countess.